But it's good. I've never really studied the Apostle John. Can you turn this down just a little bit? It's like a little loud, but I've never really studied the Apostle John's life, and I think Peter's life is more exciting. He's a little more just like puts himself out there and gets adjusted by the Lord and says a lot of wrong things, and we can kind of identify with him. And John is kind of always in the background in the Gospels, and I never really spent much time trying to follow his life. And so I appreciate going through this and following, like, Griffith Thomas, his kind of detailed study. And the more I see John, the more I am actually inspired by him. I don't know, Peter's just kind of like this, like, firecracker, and he has this kind of sprinting life with the Lord, and then he gets martyred and he's gone, and then John is just there, and John always seems to be there, and in just remaining with the Lord. And then there's something about that picture of just like he was just with the Lord, abiding. And we'll see some pictures of that. And I think a certain kind of tenderness comes out when you look at John's life, and a certain kind of like I would say it's like a real restfulness that comes out. And if we have a picture of fellowship, I think there is a restfulness that emerges when we are in a deep and ever deepening fellowship with the Lord. So and then John kind of has his like big change, I would say, with comparing three worked before there. Comparing three instances, and you can see like a change in John, and I've never really seen this change, but Jesus sets his face like flint to go to Jerusalem, and then that's kind of like that trip to Jerusalem for John was the time that kind of all his perils came out, all of his, and so here's a couple of things that he said, a few things that he said on the trip. He said, first of all, Master, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to prevent him because he does not follow along with us. And he was, very kind of narrow. And then Jesus just said, don't hinder him. He who is not against you is for you. And you just see John just kind of got adjusted. Like, we're not the only ones here. And there was a narrowness in John that was touched there. And then when the disciple, when Jesus was not welcome to a Samaritan village, John comes up to Jesus and says this, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them? And you're thinking like, wow, John is like, he's pretty, well, literally fiery and, and pretty like vindictive, not very much like, just wanting to go alongside and eventually, see something emerge. And then you get this impression of John that's like, wow, you're really, really a strong person. And then later, on the same trip, he says, Master, we just want you to do what we say. And Jesus is like, what will you say? And he's like, grant that we may sit one on your right and one on your left in your glory. And so you put all these things together. It's like, well, John wants to forbid people that are not with him. and with Jesus, and then he wants to burn up people that don't welcome Jesus, and then he wants to sit in the best place in the eternal kingdom of God. And you think, like, what a brother. What a brother. And what was going on inside of him? And then you think back, like when Jesus called him and James, he said, "You are sons of thunder." He gave them that name, the sons of thunder. And and I kind of get the impression that from these three instances, John really took these lessons to heart. I could imagine him, and this is kind of speculation, but I could imagine him saying, yeah, what kind of spirit am I? And like I really don't, I can't really control my position in the kingdom, but I'll just take the cup that the Lord gives me, the baptized with the baptism that the Lord gives me. That's what the Lord taught. And also, if another person is not actively following, just let him go. Just let him go. And it seems like he just learned these lessons. And then the next scene that you see with John is this. Is at the last meal that the Lord had with disciples. And we can read this together. There was reclining on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom Jesus loved. Does this look like the same person who was like, "Lord, do you want us to command fire? Or I want to sit on your right side in your kingdom"? It's just like the whole thing is just different. It's just different. And you see John in this, picture of reclining on Jesus' bosom and just appreciating how much Jesus loved him. And that's his kind of description of himself. The Lord loves me. And, and the interesting thing about this is if you look at the context, which we kind of talked about last week, is like everyone's troubled. Everyone is troubled. And Jesus himself, who is peace, said this. He became troubled in his spirit and testified, like, one of you is going to betray me. And then the disciples from other gospels, we know that they came to Jesus and said, "Is it I?" Every one of them said, "Is it I?" And then here, they're just at a loss to know which one will it be. And then you just see this disciple just reclining. He's not asking to burn up the person who is going to betray. He's not asking to stop him. He's just there. And Griffith Thomas says, like, it's like that reclining. It's like a picture of fellowship. And I think it is a really good picture of what fellowship is. And I feel like even what fellowship is just like kind of opening up more. It's like, it's just, it doesn't necessarily change your situation. The fellowship doesn't necessarily change the situation. It doesn't necessarily give you a certain kind of leading. It doesn't necessarily give you a certain kind of direction or key to the next phase. It's just a sharing. And that fellowship is, like kind of pictured with John just resting on Jesus' bosom. And you could say like the whole picture or the whole message of John's first epistle is fellowship. And I'll just read the first few verses, like that which was from the beginning, which we have heard. And John just opens up his experience. We've heard, we've seen with our eyes, we looked upon, have touched with our hands concerning the word of life. And you just think about, like, when Jesus was just lying there, John heard him. John saw him. He could touch Jesus with his hands. And then he's like, I was in fellowship with the word of life. And then it says the life was made manifest. We've seen it. I've seen it and testified to it and proclaimed to you the eternal life, which was with the Father and was made manifest to us. That which we have seen and heard, we proclaim to you. Here's that word, so that you too may have fellowship with us. And indeed, our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. And that fellowship is like it's a word that means a partnership, a participation. And it means, it's like a sharing. And that sharing, in a spiritual sense, it's like that sharing is, so, intrinsic or deep that it's like there's just an impartation of life in that sharing, in that fellowship. It's like I have fellowship with the Son and I have fellowship with the Father, and I'm just sharing in that life. I'm just partaking in the nature. I am joining with him. And then to be in this kind of life, I just remember one time, and I gave this little testimony last week, but one time I just asked the Lord, like, it was a really hard time. And I was just like, I just want to get out of it. I just want to get out of it. Tell me, what can I do to get out? And, if you want me to do this, I'll do it. If you want me to do that, I'll do that. If you want me to whatever. And then the Lord was just like, nothing. What am I in? I am just in fellowship. And, in that fellowship, there's just an impartation, a flow of the divine life. And that fellowship is kind of like this. The water that I will give you will become in you a spring of water gushing up. And that fellowship is kind of like this. Out of your innermost being will flow rivers of living water. And it's just like there's just a fellowship. So you could even tell a believer, don't do anything, just be in fellowship. Be in fellowship. And then all kinds of things might happen with a believer who's in fellowship. Why? Because there's just a flow of life. And as we were talking about the resurrection this past Sunday, I was really struck, after the resurrection, John is so big on fellowship. And you could look at John and just say, like, wow, maybe the whole book is just about fellowship. And then, after the resurrection, Jesus said just a few things recorded in John. One is this: hey, tell my brothers. Wait a minute, there's brothers. So now we're in fellowship with the Son after resurrection. Brothers, there's fellowship, there's a sharing. And then he says this: I go to my Father and your Father. Oh, wait a minute, now there's fellowship with the Father. And then just a few verses later, that evening of that first day, he says, receive the Holy Spirit. And so you just realize, like, wow, after resurrection, you know what the Lord brought us into? He brought us into the fellowship of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. We're brothers of Christ, sons of the Father, and filled with the Spirit, having the fellowship of the Spirit. And you just realize, like, John is just full of fellowship. almost wish I had more time just to look through all of the Gospel of John, just to look at the riches of fellowship. You're just there and sharing. And you could say, like, I just want to leave all of my other interests, and I just want to enter into this fellowship. And that's what John did at the end of in his first epistle. It's like, I just want to tell you about how my hands handled it, and my ears heard, and my eyes saw, and how I beheld him. And then I just want to let you know that, just so that you could have fellowship with us, and our fellowship is with the Father and with the Son. And John's way was like, I just want to be in that. Right now, I'm considering about considering about different saints. It's like, sometimes it's just challenging to really help people. Issues come up or other things come up, and you know what is the real solution? My fellowship is with the Father and with his Son. It's just like, wow, there's it's just open. There's a sharing, and in that sharing, there's an impartation of life. And when there is that impartation of life, let me tell you, a lot of issues just go away. They just go away. Why? There's just like a flow of life, an impartation of life. Well, I really like this picture of John, and we'll go through like his time in the garden, and his time in the trial, and his time at the cross. And one thing that's unique about John is he really stays and remains with Jesus. It's interesting. A lot of the other, Peter makes it to the courtyard, and then he denies the Lord 3 times, and he goes out. And then a lot of the other disciples, just scatter. Even Jesus prophesies, or Zechariah prophesies, strike the shepherd, the sheep will be scattered. And then, and Jesus says, you'll all be scattered. And then you could think, like, yeah, I think they were all scattered, at the arrest of Jesus. But then one sheep came back, and that was John. And he just stays with him the whole time. And I like to think that remaining with him was like a picture of the result of that lying on his bosom. and then also, it's also a picture of how much John was with Jesus. Is like a picture of what happens when a person abides, when a person just is in fellowship. Then you just realize Jesus will just take you through all kinds of things. They're like, oh, I see your trial. Oh, I see your death. Oh, I see your crucifixion. Oh, I see your resurrection. Oh, Lord, I see all of those things. Why? Because I am just in fellowship. And in fellowship, you're just taking me through all of these processes. So, he just remains with Jesus. And you're going to see, like, what a value remaining with Jesus. What's the value of fellowship? Well, you remain with Jesus. And when you remain with Jesus, a lot of very interesting, very lively, very unveiling, revelatory things happen. You're just remaining with Jesus. So, he was. Jesus says, you just stood by. You stood by me in my trials. You're just with me in all those trials. Let's all aspire to be that way. I think we like have that aspiration, Lord. I just want to stay with you in all your trials. And then they got to see this, came to a place of Gethsemane. This is in the garden. And he took with him Peter, James, and John. Those are the special 3, or the 3 that are given the special place. Maybe I won't say the special 3 that were just given the special place. And, They just witness him. And I won't go into the details of this scene, but it's just interesting. They see Jesus, and this is what happens in fellowship. You just see Jesus, and he says, like, my soul is deeply grieved, even to the point of death. And then he goes and he prays, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. And then look at this. Remove this cup from me. And it's like a little window into what fellowship looks like. Yet not what I will, but you will. This is the clearest. Mark is the clearest. Where Jesus is just, it's not like, it's like, whatever you will, I want to do that. You know what Jesus says here? Remove it. Remove it. And when you ask about fellowship, what is fellowship? Well, fellowship is a sharing. It's a sharing. It doesn't mean like, speak, your servant heareth. It means, Father, I have a will. That's what Jesus would say. I have a will. And my will is not the same as yours. My will is this: remove this cup from me. When you talk about fellowships, like, this is fellowship. And then the Father responds. And maybe Jesus has some internal realization of that response. And he realizes that will is not the same as the Father's will. And so he concludes, yet not what I will, but what you will. Not what I will, but what you will. What a picture of fellowship. Fellowship is it's something where you can just tell the Lord what you want. Just like Jesus. Remove this cup from me. And then there's an openness and a kind of a, I guess in our modern terms, we would say there's a safe space. Isn't that modern, Hannah? Is that a proper modern term? There's like a safe space between the Father and Son. And in that safe space, the Father would not get mad if he hears the Son say, remove this cup from me. He'd be just like, I don't know what the Father does. I don't know. He just allows the Son to have this kind of fellowship. And then the Son, in his perfection, says this: you know what? Not my will, but yours. And what a wonderful thought. Some people have a thought like, if I follow God, he will always give me what I hate. That's wrong. Other people say, if I follow God, I will always get what I want. That's wrong. How about this? If I follow God, I will be in fellowship. The fellowship of the Father and of the Son. And while John was just, somebody heard it, so he wasn't, they weren't all asleep during this whole time. Maybe they fell asleep after this. But you get to see, like, wow, that's what it is to be in fellowship. And, there's this constant flow of life between the Father and Son, to the point where he's the only begotten Son. And they wonder, like, and theologians wonder, like, how could he be the only begotten Son? Because is there ever a time when before he was begotten? Is there ever a time before but he's the only begotten Son? How does that work? Like, well, then they come up with this explanation. He is ever and always being begotten. I kind of like it. How is he the only begotten Son? He's the only begotten Son because he is ever and always being begotten. And then what does that mean? There's like a flow from the Father to the Son, and that flow is just ever. It's eternal. It's eternal. And then with that ever and always being begotten Son, he can just have this like relationship, but the relationship is entirely in life, because you can't have a father without a son. You can't have a son without a father. They're always there. They're always there, and then always existing. And then here we have the Son as a man having fellowship, entering into fellowship with the Father, and saying something like, "Remove this cup from me," and then resolving, "No, not my will, but yours." Oh, picture of fellowship. And you can just say, "Lord, I just want that. I want that." And then maybe when you say it, the Father will be like, And then there's this ever flowing fellowship of ever flowing life. And you could hear words like, "Drink of this water that I will give you. And the water that I will give you will become in you a spring of water, gushing up into eternal life." And then what are you in? You are in the fellowship of the Son and of the Father, or the fellowship of the Father and of his Son. Well, it's just interesting. And, they fell asleep. And then I kind of like this. Jesus finally says, this is in Matthew, "Keep watching, praying that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Fellowship, it's hard. Let me tell you, it's hard. It's much easier to be a churchgoer. It's much easier to be a good little Christian boy or a good little Christian sister than to be in fellowship. In fellowship, it's like your flesh is just weak. It's like, I don't want to go to the Lord. I just want to go to church. I don't want to go to the Lord. I just want to read the Bible. I don't want to go to the Lord. I just want to do what the brothers say. I don't want to go to the Lord. I just want to not do what the brothers say. It's easier to do anything except fellowship. And so, then while the disciples were supposed to be, praying, the Lord was just having that interaction. And isn't that interaction what we saw there? Doesn't that look like an intense kind of experience? The Son, the eternal Son, tells the Father, "Remove this cup from me." And you're like, "Oh, did he just, what just happened?" You mean, are you saying there's no redemption? Remove this cup from me? Are you saying there's no, and like, oh my goodness, these are high stakes. And then the Father's like, And then the Son's like, "Not my will, but yours." And you might think like, I'm just tired. Just thinking about it. Just thinking of, I don't like conflict. Just thinking about that. I can't take it. I just want to go to church. Spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Watchman Nee has one thing. He's like, I didn't understand it for a long time. He says, when you really begin to serve the Lord, you become very lazy. Anybody who has lifted 200 pounds knows what it is to lift 200 pounds. How much, whatever it takes. And then anybody who has not lifted 200 pounds does not know what it is to lift 200 pounds. I was like, what are you saying? I don't think I quoted it exactly, but I get it. You know what 200 pounds is? Fellowship. It's just like, I'm just open to the Lord. And I'm allowing that life to flow through. You know what? And then you realize like, oh, that's a lot of, that's an interaction. That's an interaction. Preach the gospel to this person. I don't want to preach the gospel to that person. And there's like, boo, 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 boo. And then all this kind of interaction. And then it's like, this is fellowship. This is fellowship. And during that fellowship, there's just a flowing of life, just like the only begotten Son has is in fellowship with the Father, and there's an ever flowing life. And then the disciples couldn't take it. They just fell asleep. But then Jesus is like, you know what? Your spirit is able to do that. Your spirit is willing, but your flesh is weak. What a picture of fellowship. Okay. And then I kind of shared on this already. I think when Jesus was arrested, this is where I was like, where did John scatter? Because Zechariah says, strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. And then Jesus quotes that and says, and looks at all the disciples like, you'll all be scattered. And so then I was like, but then John was at the trial. He was at the cross. And I was like, did he at the last minute, did he scatter from Jesus or whatever? And so we looked it up. Ben and I looked it up, and we just could not find anything except this one person said this. It's like he's scattered. They all scattered. But he says that one sheep came back. And that was John. That was John. And so maybe the moment Jesus was arrested, they were all like, this is too hot. It's too much pressure. I just got to go. And then John comes back. And then this is I got from Griffith Thomas. Okay, John was known by the high priest. It says the high priest knew him. And maybe because he had a wealthy family. And you can tell he had a wealthy family because he had all of those, he had servants. The family had servants. And so maybe the family was just known by the high priest because of their wealth. And then also, this probably the servant girl knew that John was with him. Why? Because when she's talking about Peter, she uses the word too or also. And then so Griffith Thomas is like, oh, she knows John is there. So in that way, it's very interesting. The servant girl says, this man was with him too. So he points to Peter. And then, so this is what the scene could be like. Well, John is there. I was with Jesus. Yep. And then Peter's like, what do you say? Woman, I don't know him. It's kind of a funny contrast. I never thought about it. You're with him too. But John was there and known to the high priest. And it's like the whole thing was known. And he just went through that trial period. And then he just, Peter denied the Lord 3 times. And then the Lord looked at him. Their eyes met across the crowded room. And then Peter's he just weeps and he just goes away. And through all of that, John is just there. He's just there. Maybe he's not one of those flashy brothers. He's just there. And he's even there at the cross. And Jesus will even talk to him. We'll talk a little bit about that. But he's just there. And, I don't know, I'm kind of inspired how precious it is just to be there. I remember one time I don't want to boast too much. Well, the boast is only I'm still here. But I went to breakfast with this brother, and he's like, Rex, this was years ago. It's like, Rex, we're serving young people. And I don't think you're very serious about serving young people. And if you don't get serious about serving young people, I cannot serve with you. In other words, get serious or get out. And I was like, I've never had a brother say that. Wow. It's like, that's powerful. It's like, I am burdened for young people. I mean, I don't know. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to how do you want me to prove my seriousness? But boy, what it's just what power. the brother left. And I don't even know if he still agrees with like the Bible. And you know what? I'm here. That's why I don't like to boast, but the only boast of this story is like I'm still here. And when I think about John, he's kind of like, I'm here. And Peter was like, Lord, if everyone falls away from you, I will remain. I will go with you to prison and to death. And then this little girl comes up to him, and then Peter cries. And then John's like, I'm not that flashy, but you know what I'm in? I'm just in fellowship. I just have fellowship. I was with a brother, and then I was like trying to explain something about the Lord, and he's like, it's about life. I was asked, we were reading about Isaac and the promise on Isaac in Romans 4, and he's like, it's about life. And I was like, yes, it's life. It's life. It's just like, and when I see John was still at the cross, I feel like how boring. But John's like, I'm just here. I just have fellowship. Just have fellowship. And then, Jesus only said 7 things on the cross. Only 7. Only 7. And one of them was to John. And he looks down while he's hanging there. And he just sees his mother and the disciple whom Jesus loved standing there. So his mom and John were just standing there. And then he said to his mom, woman, behold your son. He said to the disciple, behold your mother. And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own household. You see, if you just think about fellowship, you may be like saying like, that's so boring. One time we read a story about Jean Guion's biography, or it was like experiencing the depths of Jesus Christ. And this one brother, he didn't quite get it. And he was like, all this is it makes you feel good. That's it. What about feeding the poor? What about all this? It's just about making you feel good. I was like, brother, I don't think you get it. Fellowship. It's not about what makes you feel good. It's a reality. And you know what might happen? You might end up taking care of Jesus' mom. That's fellowship. You're just there. And then, Jesus makes a statement from the cross. 1/7 of his statements from the cross is just about John and Jesus' mom. What a picture. What a picture of a servant of the Lord. Griffith Thomas he speculates, and I think not only he, but many others, like, why didn't Jesus commit his mom's care to one of his brothers? And then they're like, they didn't believe him. They didn't believe in him. His brothers did not even believe. And so, and then Jesus had Mary move to John's house. That's what the verse says. From that time, he went into the house. And then look at this. Thus, the opportunity provided John to manifest his interest and love on behalf of his dead master would be of great value to the development of his character. And just a thought of just like John there over the years, and church history says that He stayed in Judea 10 or 11 years until Mary passed. That's what church history says. And we don't really have a way of verifying that or whatever, but if you go to Miller's or something like that, like maybe 10 or 11 years. And then you just think about it. Like, this was Jesus' commitment to John, and Jesus exercise to John. Like, John, Peter may go to Joppa and preach the gospel, and may go to Cornelius' house and do all of those things, and then open up the door to the Gentiles and do marvelous things. And you know what you're going to do, John? You're taking care of my mom. You're taking care of my mom. Griffith Thomas is like, what development of character? And I and this comes out of fellowship. And I remember, like, I have a personal testimony of, like, one time I had to render my family a lot of care at the time. And then I went to a conference on John. And then I just saw this picture of, like, Jesus or John just taking care of his mom. And then I was thinking at that point, it's like, oh my goodness, I want to serve the Lord so much, but I just feel so limited by the needs right now. And I was really limited by the needs, and I wanted to serve so much, and I just felt like I just can't. And then, oh my goodness, how much I was ministered to by this picture here of Peter going so many places. And then John, from the dying words of Jesus, saying, you have to take care of my mom. And he was faithful in that. And it's interesting. John didn't write his epistles until maybe 90 something AD. Peter wrote his in the 60s. And then maybe the Lord was like, I was doing something in John. I was just doing something. And then you just have, like, some limitation. And Jesus actually gave him a limitation. And he took it and was allowed it to be a part of him. And then, one brother said Mary was very particular about her soup. John would bring soup to Mary, and she's like, too cold. It's like, he has to go back. Well, Peter's like, Cornelius, I call on God to, like, whatever. And then John's like, oh, the soup I got to warm up the soup. And then Mary's like, oh, there's a bone in it. So I was like, I'm sorry. It's like, I don't know if Mary was like that. I have no idea. But you just think about it. So what John did is fellowship, out of the fellowship. And then you see, like, God just, like, working on his servant in a lot of different ways. And how many times saints who really do want to serve in a lot of different ways, they're limited by health, family, and then and you wonder, like, well, how's this gonna work out? Well, look at Brother John, the only one who stayed at the cross, because there's some fellowship there. He was just, I'm just with the Lord. And then Jesus committed his mom to that, and to him. And John was just able to see a lot of things, and it's very interesting. Like, verse 35 is very interesting. You know, he just stays there, and then he sees after Jesus dies, so he's there for the whole time. That's why I couldn't find when he's scattered, because you know, the soldier pierces his side after he's already dead, and so that means John was with him like through the whole time, through all the darkness of the final 3 hours. John probably saw the earthquake, or felt the earthquake, saw the tombs open. Maybe he heard the gigantic rip of the veil in the temple. And then he saw the soldier pierce his side. And immediately blood and water came out. And look at this. He who has seen has testified. That's a key. He who has seen has testified. His testimony is true. He knows that he is telling the truth, so that you also may believe. And you may say, like, John, why were you in fellowship at the cross? And he's like, because somebody had to see the blood and water. Somebody had to see that blood and water. And then why do you add verse 35? I mean, you could say that about the whole book of the Gospel of John. But he's like, no, I was there. I was really with the Lord. You could say, I saw. And then it's not just something like, it's not just a thing you hear. And it's not in God. It's not in Matthew. It's not in Mark. It's not in Luke. It's only in the book of the person who was lying on Jesus' bosom. And he's like, when he was pierced, I saw it. He who has, why do you add that? Like, there's so few words that are available to you. So small of a real estate. But he's like, I've seen. And then that is a picture of a person in fellowship. You're just like remaining, you're abiding, you're with the Lord, you're with him. And then maybe it's a Tuesday and you just happen to wake up like 15 minutes earlier than normal, and you have a little bit more time to be in the book of Isaiah. And it's not a special day, but you just realize, like, I saw. He who has seen. I'm just a person in fellowship, and there's a flow of life and a ministry of the Spirit, and there's something there. It's like, I saw and I testify. And then John would bring this out. There's blood and water. And if you look for it in Matthew, it's not there. In Mark, it's not there. In Luke, it's not there. Why? None of those people who wrote those books were there. But John is like, I'm here. I'm just here. I'm here through the whole crucifixion. And yeah, I got an extra burden. If that brother's right, he had to make the soup exactly the right temperature, no bones, enough chicken, enough potatoes, whatever. But then he also saw, I saw the piercing, and there's blood and water. And what a testimony. What a testimony. One time, it's a funny story. I tell more stories tonight because it's smaller, but I was once with a group of pathologists. You know, my wife's a pathologist, so we were eating together for dinner, and I was like, I want to try to bring up the gospel to them. And so I was like, so when the soldier pierced Jesus' side, blood and water came out. Can you explain that? Like, and then you know what he said? you shouldn't be so like technical about it. Just believe. I was like, okay. I was trying to find out some medical explanation. Like I was just trying to start a conversation about the gospel. And he's like, just believe, just believe. It's like, okay. So you can find books where there's medical explanations, how the blood separates and all that kind of stuff. But I have one at home. I could give it to you, but it's very meaningful. And John remained, so he saw it. And then blood is just like, oh yeah, you're just cleansed of sin. Whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water, welling up into eternal life. And if you have this kind of fellowship, it's like, I see. You could be like, I have the worst sin, but I see the blood. You could say, I am so dry, but I see the water. And then that's a gift to the whole church, to the whole body of Christ. Like, well, there's blood and water that came out from the side. And then we know that because somebody was there, somebody was in fellowship, and somebody could say, I saw, and then even use so many words. He who has seen has testified. His testimony is true. He knows that he is telling the truth so that you may believe. What? Believe that blood and water came out of his side. Fellowship. It's fellowship. It's fellowship. Well, after Jesus' resurrection, this goes fast. So, Mary goes to the tomb. And then this is an inspiration. I don't know if it's right or not. Peter and the other disciple went forth. Mary goes and says, like, hey, Peter and John, look, the tomb is empty. So they go to the tomb. And then this is where Peter says, the two were running together. John says, the two were running together. The other disciple ran ahead faster than Peter and came to the tomb first. So we know that John was a faster runner than Peter. I think Peter had a wife who cooked really good baked goods, and he was a little heavier. And then John was like this young spring whatever, and son of thunder, maybe working out and stuff. And he did. And then the disciples see the tomb, the empty tomb. And then you know what? The disciples went away again to their own homes. And Mary stays. And when Mary stayed, she saw, Mary Magdalene, she saw the Lord. And then you know what Griffith Thomas says? John went back because he had to tell Mary. Because you know where Mary was? At his home. Who knows? This is Griffith Thomas. Almost like his mom has to know. Jesus told me, like, and then how could I be here without his mom, like, knowing? And who knows? But if that is true, it's a real picture of John's commitment to Jesus' dying words. And also, like, I put my spirituality aside because Jesus gave me a command. And I really want to care for her. And how could he be resurrected without his mom knowing? And then of course he appears to Mary, then he appears to the disciples. He receives the Spirit, and then I'll just end with this final thing. John is just supposed to remain until the Lord comes. And Jesus tells Peter what kind of death he's going to die, and says you're going to, someone else will gird you and take you to a place where you don't want to go, and that's the death you will die. And then Peter turns around and sees John, the disciple Jesus loved, and he's like, Lord, what about this man? What about this man? And this is what Jesus says: if I want him to remain till I come, remain till I come. And then there was a rumor that went out among the brethren that the disciple would not die. It's like, he's going to remain until he comes. So Lord's going to come back. And then, so basically then you just wait for John to get very old and you're like, the Lord's coming soon because of the promise. And then John just corrects the whole thing. No. Jesus didn't say to him that he would not die, but only if I want him to remain until I come. What is that to you? And then, so like, he's just remaining. John is a remainer. Same word as abide. Abide in me, I in you. Same word, just remain. And then I was like, what does this mean? What does it mean? Remain till I come. So Alfred says three things, three possibilities. One is that he would be there until he dies. He would be faithful until he dies. Remain until I come. It would be faithful until he dies, until John dies. Number two is this: until like Jerusalem is destroyed, and then it's like, wow, after Jerusalem is destroyed in AD 70, then the whole like finally like the church is like out of all of that influence of that city, and then there's some kind of like new kind of stand, and then the third thing is like Jesus could just say like, why are you worried about him? If I say that, why are you worried? That's what he's saying. Why are you worried? What is that to you? And then Alfred's like, I take number two, which is like after Jerusalem, it's like a new, what does this mean? But he said, I take it with reservations. And then some people say it was a coming of the Spirit, remaining till I come of the Spirit. But then all the disciples were there for the coming of the Spirit. And so and then I would agree with maybe Alfred, like after Jerusalem's destroyed, he gets the vision of book of Revelation. It's like, wow, he does see the Lord coming, Griffith Thomas is just basically like, he just was waiting. He was a waiter, a remainer. And I'm sorry, I don't have any time. So maybe I'll pick this up at the beginning of next week, but he just was remaining, abiding. And even in the end, I'm just like a fellow partaker. John was just, I'm a brother, partner in the tribulation kingdom and the patient endurance that are in Jesus. And you see in John, just like, you know what? He was remaining. And he's the longest remaining of the apostles. The other ones, James, his brother, just like by Acts chapter 12, he was killed with a sword. It's fast. John is not fast. He's slow. And he just remains. And he does see the coming of the Lord in the book of Revelation. And that may be some meaning between of that. If I want him to remain till I come, what is that? What is that to you? But we just know that Jesus saw something in John and gave him a charge of like, you're going to have a long life. You need endurance. This is not a sprint. It's going to be a long endurance race. And so John at the end says, like, I'm just your partner in not only the kingdom, but also the patient endurance that is in Jesus. I took care of Mary 10, 11 long years. I have seen the church go through ups and downs. I've seen Jerusalem take ascendancy over the church and then be totally destroyed by the Romans. And it's no more. I've seen it all. I've seen heresies come into the church, people saying the teaching lawless things, people saying Jesus Christ didn't come in the flesh. And I've seen it all. And you know what? I'm remaining. I'm still abiding. I'm still here. And I am your brother and partner in all of that. So the more I see John, the more I like him. The more I like him. He wasn't that kind of person who was like, Rex, if you're not serious about the John is like, praise the Lord. Just love the Lord Jesus. But what a sweet brother, and what a testimony that this brother gives to the body. And you really see some of the roots of his epistles from his experiences with the Lord. So I'll stop there.